Hello, welcome back to part 2 of Activity 97. Today we're going to go over the stopping to think answers. Hopefully you wrote them in your notebook. If for some reason you didn't, you can take the time and do that today as we go over them. Or at the very, very least, please make sure that you understand the questions. So in the first passage, they talk to you about the angelfish and how the angelfish look very similar, but they actually have very small differences between them. So the very first stopping to think question asked you to think about similarities and differences about people that you know. It actually said 10 people. So if we were in class, I would tell you to look around the room, if you can envision what we looked like still sitting in our seats. What are some of the physical features that are likely to be a result of genetic differences? So the things that you can actually see when you look at people. And then B, what are some of the physical features that may not be a result of genetics? Maybe things that have come to pass after you were born. And then part C asked you, what are some physical features that might be a result of both genetics and other factors? So we're going to talk about, this is going back to the idea of inherited traits, things that you're born with, and your acquired traits, things that happen to you in your lifetime. And then C is kind of a combination of both. So I have a chart here. Let's take a look. The physical features that we talked about, things that you would see when you looked around the room that we all look a little bit different, are things like hair color, eye color, skin color, height. Those are all really obvious. Obviously, if you looked a little bit closer, you'd be able to find other things like shapes of fingers and how hairy people are, things like that. Those are all genetic things that you're born with. If you look at the middle column, physical things that aren't a part of your DNA, things that happen in your lifetime might be things like a burn or a scar or piercings in your ears, amputations if anyone's lost any pieces. Those things have all happened in your lifetime. You would not pass them down to your offspring. So even though some of us look different because of these things, they would not be inherited. Now this column is kind of unique. So we all have different skin tones. But remember, you inherit your skin tone for sure, which is why we have it over here in your skin color feature. But remember, if I spend a lot of time in the sun, my skin color is going to change. It'll get darker. Or if I don't ever go out in the sun, I would be a lot lighter. So this can be influenced by things that happen during my life, as well as my DNA that I inherit. Same thing with intelligence. Let's say you inherit an extremely high IQ, but you never go to school and you never learn how to read. Your intelligence probably wouldn't be as high as it possibly could. And the opposite is true. Maybe you are born genetically with not as great of an IQ, but you work really, really hard in school and you can actually raise your IQ and train your brain. So if you look at all of these things, your personality, they have done studies that you inherit a lot of your personality traits. Now, some people argue that when you grow up in a house with certain people, you kind of learn their behaviors. But you can also talk about, they've done studies with identical twins that have identical DNA. One of the twins is brought up in a very loving, nurturing home, and the other twin is brought up in maybe a neglectful home or even an abusive home. And those two individuals, even though they have identical DNA for personality, have completely different personalities because they've had different experiences. Same thing with your weight. Some of us are predisposed to be thin, but I could be born with DNA to be extremely thin, great metabolism. But if I eat, 20 Twinkies a day, I'm sure that my weight would be higher than where it was supposed to be. So that is a combination of inherited and acquired traits. And same thing with muscles. If I go to the gym and I work out all the time, I might have larger muscles than were passed to me, or vice versa. So those are things that can be influenced both ways. Okay, guys, in the second passage, they talk a lot about the fork birds, and that was the lab that we skipped for Activity 96. But if you read the part about the mutations, the paragraph about the mutations, that is the important part. So stopping to think question number 2 asks you to You have a dog who has puppies, and the vet tells you that one of the puppies has a genetic mutation. So it asks you to think about a mutation for a puppy that would be neither helpful nor harmful, and it asks you to think of a mutation that would be harmful to that puppy. So I have two choices. So if we take a look, maybe my computer's being funny. Hang on. Okay. A mutation in a puppy that would be neither helpful or harmful could be like different colored eyes. That is just one example. If a dog has one blue eye, one brown eye, that wouldn't affect him in any capacity. It doesn't help them. It doesn't hurt them. It's just a mutation that makes them different. If a puppy's born missing a leg, that would obviously be more of a harmful mutation because the puppy would have trouble getting around. Even though we put out food and provide shelter, the dog could fall down the stairs, or it could run into a wall, or it might, have to pull its back legs, which would cause further damage. So I am sure that you came up with really good examples. If you came up with an example that you were not sure of, please ask me, send me a message, and we'll talk about it. But I'm hoping that you were able to think of things for a dog that would be neither helpful nor harmful for A, or something that would be dangerous for the dog for B, that would be harmful. Okay, the next passage talks a little bit about speciation, and it uses the example of birds with larger beaks, and it talks about, if a bird had to be able to eat larger nuts, then the birds with the larger beaks would be more successful, and over many generations the population can change, and that's how you could actually end up with a new species, which is that speciation that we talked about the other day. So the question they give you is, have you ever heard anyone wrapping a present say, "I wish I had another hand"? And you're supposed to explain why an organism couldn't choose to have a mutation that would let it be more successful. And so, like, could a bird choose to have a large beak? So if a bird shows up on an island and there's nothing for it to eat but really large nuts, can the bird say, "Oh, we better make some babies that have larger beaks"? It's not a choice. So your answer for stopping to think number 3 should have said that you cannot choose your traits. Your genes are passed on to you from your parents. Your parents don't get to choose which traits they give you. Those traits are inherited and not acquired. So I made the joke when we were still in the classroom that your parents don't get to go. It's not like a Sheets menu where they get to choose the traits that you get. You're not an MTO. You're not made to order. So there is it's completely random which traits your mom and your dad pass on to you. And it is also random how those traits, if those genes are affected and mutations happen. So you are born with what you have, and you don't get to choose because those acquired traits are not a part of your DNA. Okay, the next passage talks about Charles Darwin and his finches. And so of this entire reading, you guys, I really think that this is the most important passage. So if you didn't read, I would go back and read pages 40 and 41 between stopping to think 3 and 4. It uses the finches of the Galapagos Islands to give you another example of speciation. So essentially what it says is that there was a mainland bird in South America. It migrated to the islands, and the islands are all kind of separate, and they have different habitats on them and different food sources. And so over thousands or millions of years, those birds adapted due to different variations that made them each more specialized and more successful on their each individual island. And then over time, those birds became so different that they could no longer reproduce together, and that you ended up with the 14 different species of birds. And the question they give you is that your friend says that means there should only be 14 mutations that occurred. And you were supposed to say whether you agreed or disagreed. So hopefully you disagreed with your friend. The total number of mutations in the Galapagos finches would have to be way more than 14. It is also based on what we learned about with different species reproducing. It's really unlikely that just one mutation would prevent two populations from interbreeding. Remember, we talked about the horse and the donkey. They have a lot more differences than one mutation, and they can still reproduce, albeit not super successfully. They get the mule. But to get to a point where you would have 14 different birds that came from one common ancestor, that would have to be a lot of different mutations that cause lots and lots of different physical traits that made those birds successful on the different islands. Okay, and then the final passage, there's no stopping to think for it, but the final passage goes back and talks to you about the cichlids and the Nile perch. And it says that, Lake Victoria is so big. If you remember from class, it's the same size as about West Virginia, that there are so many different habitats in that lake. Different temperatures, warmer up top, colder on the bottom, different kinds of plants, different predators live in different parts of the lake, and so on and so forth. So the cichlids have adapted to living in different parts of the lake, and they have developed different variations that make them better suited to different environments within that one single lake. So many so that there are now over 300 different species of those cichlids in Lake Victoria. So that is a lot of genetic variation. And the thing about this at the end is that unlike Darwin, who didn't have DNA to look at, today we can study the DNA of the cichlids and see how they're similar and how they're different. And that's really a good piece of evidence to tell us how those mutations have accumulated and how we can end up with so many different species of the same animal. Okay, so that is the end of Activity 97, Stopping to Think. What I would like for you to do the rest of the time is to answer analysis questions 1, 2, and 3 in your notebook. I want you to pay close attention to number 2. So number 2 is going to ask you about the cichlids and kind of use what I just explained to you to show how speciation could occur among the cichlids. And number 3 is really cool. It's a cool question. And we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of bacteria and how important that is, and antibiotics and how that all works together. So do me a favor, and for the rest of your science time today, I'd really like you to work on those 3 questions. Tomorrow, we are going to go over those answers and make sure that you understand. And then you're going to do a little graded activity for me tomorrow. So make sure that you understand. Make sure you are emailing me if you have questions. I'm really thinking about setting up some tutoring times where we can chat live so that I can help anyone who's struggling. If that's something that you think you would need, it would be optional, but I think we're going to put it out there. Overall, I've been pretty happy with your scores. Everyone's been turning stuff in pretty well, but I can't stress enough to send me an email and let me know if you need help so that I can help you. There are lots of different ways we can set that up. Okay, so go ahead and work on your analysis, and I will check in with you again tomorrow. Thanks, guys.